Nicholas Hartwell had perfected the art of not feeling. At 43, he'd built a technology empire worth billions, survived a divorce that made headlines, and learned to keep every emotion locked behind an impenetrable wall. He sat in first class on the flight from Boston to Seattle, his laptop open, reviewing acquisition reports that would put 300 people out of work by Friday. Just numbers, he told himself. Just business. The plane was half empty, the way he preferred it. Fewer people meant fewer interactions, fewer chances for anyone to breach his carefully maintained distance from the world. Then she appeared in the aisle. A little girl, perhaps 5 years old, with light brown hair pulled into pigtails and a pink dress that had seen better days. She wore a small red backpack and clutched a worn, stuffed rabbit. Behind her, a flight attendant gently guided her toward the empty seat directly across the aisle from Nicholas. "Here we are, sweetie," the attendant said warmly. "Your seat for the flight. I'll be checking on you, okay? You're going to see your grandma in Seattle, right?" The little girl nodded solemnly, climbing into the seat with the determined independence of a child trying very hard to be brave. Nicholas returned his attention to his laptop, determined to ignore the disruption. He had 3 more reports to review before landing. The plane taxied and took off smoothly. Nicholas kept his eyes on the screen, on the numbers that made sense. That followed predictable patterns that never asked uncomfortable questions. "Excuse me," a small voice said. He ignored it. "Excuse me, mister," the voice persisted. Nicholas looked up with the expression that made junior executives tremble. The little girl was leaning across the aisle, her brown eyes fixed on him with unsettling directness. "Yes?" he said curtly, hoping his tone would discourage further conversation. "Why are you so sad?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Nicholas felt his carefully constructed composure crack just slightly. "I'm not sad. I'm working." "But your face is sad," she insisted with the brutal honesty only children possess. "You have sad eyes. My mommy had sad eyes before she went to heaven." "Are you going to heaven too?" Nicholas stared at this child who just casually mentioned her mother's death as if discussing the weather. Something in his chest tightened painfully. "I'm sorry about your mother," he said, his voice softer despite himself. The girl nodded, hugging her stuffed rabbit. "It's okay. Daddy says she's watching over me now. But Daddy has sad eyes too, even when he smiles. Like you." Nicholas should have returned to his work. Should have put in his headphones and ended this conversation. Instead, he found himself asking, "What's your name?" "Sophie, I'm 5 3/4. "What's your name?" "Nicholas. That's a big name." "Can I call you Nick?" No one had called him Nick since childhood. "I suppose." Sophie smiled, and something about that simple expression of uncomplicated joy made Nicholas's throat tighten. "I like planes," she announced. "Do you like planes, Nick?" "They're efficient transportation." Sophie wrinkled her nose. "That's a boring answer." "Planes are magic. They make people fly like birds. My mommy said when we fly, we're closer to heaven so she can see us better." Nicholas closed his laptop slowly. The acquisition report suddenly seemed obscenely trivial compared to this conversation. "Your mother sounds like she was a special person." "She was the best," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "She made the best pancakes, and she sang songs when I was scared, and she always knew when I needed hugs." "Do you have a mommy?" "I did. She passed away when I was young, about your age." Sophie's eyes widened with recognition, as if she'd found a fellow member of an exclusive club. "Then you understand about the sad eyes." "Daddy says the sad never totally goes away, but it gets smaller when you let people help carry it." Nicholas felt something crack inside him, a fissure in the wall he'd built so carefully over decades. When was the last time he'd let anyone help carry anything? When was the last time he'd admitted he needed help? "Your daddy sounds wise." "He tries really hard," Sophie said, her small face suddenly serious. "He works a lot because he has to, but he always reads me stories before bed, even when he's tired." "Do you have kids, Nick?" "I did," Nicholas heard himself say, the words escaping before he could stop them. "A son. But I wasn't a very good father. I worked too much." "His mother took him to London 3 years ago. I see him twice a year now, and when I do, he barely talks to me." Why was he telling this to a 5-year-old stranger? But Sophie just nodded as if this made perfect sense. Maybe he has sad eyes too, she suggested. Maybe he's waiting for you to tell him it's okay to be sad together. The simple wisdom of it shattered something in Nicholas. He felt his eyes begin to burn, felt moisture gathering that he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Not since the divorce hearing, not since watching his son leave, not since realizing he'd built an empire and lost everything that mattered. "I don't know how," he whispered, and was shocked to hear his voice crack. Sophie unbuckled her seatbelt and, before Nicholas could react, scrambled across the aisle and climbed into the empty seat beside him. She was so small that the seatbelt hung loose around her. "My mommy said hugs help with sad eyes," she announced, and wrapped her small arms around his arm. That's when Nicholas broke. The tears came silently at first. Then with shaking shoulders he couldn't control. This child he didn't know held onto his arm while he cried for the first time in years. He cried for his lost son, for his failed marriage, for the mother he'd buried when he was 5, for every connection he'd sacrificed in pursuit of success that suddenly felt meaningless. The flight attendant approached, concerned, but Nicholas shook his head. He was okay, or maybe he wasn't, but for the first time in decades he was admitting it. Sophie patted his arm gently, the way someone might comfort a scared animal. "It's okay to cry," she said sagely. "Tears are how the sad comes out so there's room for happy again." Nicholas wiped his eyes, looking down at this extraordinary child who'd managed to dismantle his defenses with simple questions and uncomplicated compassion. "Thank you." "Sophie, you're welcome, Nick. Do you want to see my rabbit? His name is Mr. Hopsworth. He's very good at listening." They spent the rest of the flight talking. Sophie told him about her grandmother who made cookies and her friend at school who could do a cartwheel. Nicholas found himself telling her about his son, about the camping trip they'd taken when the boy was 6, about the last time he'd heard his son laugh. "You should call him," Sophie suggested, "right when we land. Tell him about your sad eyes and ask about his. My daddy says being honest is the bravest thing." As the plane began its descent, Nicholas realized something profound had shifted. This child, dealing with her own enormous grief, had somehow given him permission to feel his own. She'd reminded him that walls don't protect us, they just make us lonely. When they landed, the flight attendant came to escort Sophie to her grandmother. Sophie hugged Nicholas tightly. "Remember," she whispered, "sad eyes get better when you share them." "Promise you'll call your son?" "I promise," Nicholas said, and meant it. He watched her skip down the jetway, her red backpack bouncing, her spirit unbroken despite everything she'd lost. Then he pulled out his phone. His son answered on the 3rd ring, his voice wary. "Dad, Thomas," Nicholas said, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to tell you something. I need to tell you that I have sad eyes, and I think maybe you do too. And I'm sorry it took me so long to say it." There was a long silence, then his son's voice, cracking with held-back tears. "I do, Dad. I really do. Then maybe we can be sad together for a while, and then maybe we can figure out how to be happy together again. Would you like that?" "Yeah, Dad. I'd like that a lot." They talked for an hour in the airport terminal, Nicholas sitting on a bench while travelers flowed around him. They cried together over the phone. They admitted fears and hurts. They started the long process of rebuilding what had been broken. When Nicholas finally hung up, he thought about Sophie and her devastating question. "Why are you so sad?" Nobody had dared to ask him that in years. Everyone saw the success, the power, the confidence. Only a child had seen past all of that to the truth underneath. He pulled up his schedule and started canceling meetings. The acquisition could wait. The reports could wait. Everything could wait. He had a son to reconnect with, a life to rebuild, and sad eyes that were finally ready to heal. Sometimes it takes a child's unfiltered honesty to break through the walls we build around our hearts. Sometimes the most important business we can attend to has nothing to do with business at all. And sometimes, on an ordinary flight, an extraordinary little girl asks the one question we've been avoiding for years, and everything changes. Nicholas had spent decades perfecting the art of not feeling. Sophie had reminded him in one short flight that feeling is what makes us human, that vulnerability is strength. And that sad eyes heal faster when we stop pretending they don't exist. He never saw Sophie again, but he thought about her often. About her wisdom, her courage, her ability to carry grief without letting it crush her spirit. She'd lost her mother, but hadn't lost her capacity for compassion. She'd faced sorrow, but hadn't forgotten how to offer comfort. In many ways, that 5-year-old girl had been the wisest person Nicholas had ever met. And her question, simple and devastating, had saved his life. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment below about a time when someone asked you the question you needed to hear. Your stories inspire us all.